the way to think about the AI in the recipe of hiring isn't like, let's jump to this end conclusion where AI is interviewing people. The AI is with you much more in a sort of copilot-like way. The best chess players in the world are starting to lose to AI, but the best chess players in the world with AI is very much beating AI on its own. So I think the equation, is going to be like that in many different places. Not AI or human, it's human and AI together gets you the best outcomes.
How do we take advantage of these AI tools, but still allow ourselves to let that humanity stay preserved in the interview process?
I think this is really important. When people think about AI, the knee-jerk reaction is to, let's let the AI interview people. And actually, that doesn't work.
It seems almost reckless, if not dangerous, to focus on quality of hire and say, well, it's so hard to measure, let's just not even measure it, but then not make any effort to look at, well, did we actually run our process the right way?
Talent acquisition often stops way short of where they should. So they stop on day one, but actually some of the most meaningful signal for the relevance is actually happening in the first.
My very special guest helped build LinkedIn Jobs and ATS. He's the founder and CEO of Hire Guide, a B Corp committed to creating positive social impact through equitable interviews. He's also an early stage business advisor at Techstars. He is Scott Parrish. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you for that very warm welcome.
You're very warm welcome. I'm very excited to have a conversation about this. The technology has been moving so quickly, and hiring's in many cases still done the way we've always done it, which means badly. So I couldn't wait to get you on the show and talk all about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, in your talks, you mentioned this shift away from quality of hire toward quality of decision. Mm-hmm. So just to get us started, I wonder if you could explain the difference between those two things.
So it's a great question. So for a long time, many companies have been thinking about how to solve this quality of hire challenge. And there's been a lot of progress in that area, but there's also a lot left to be desired. And one of the main reasons that this is happening is because quality of hire as a metric is hard to measure. Traditionally, it's measured with three things. So retention, a quality hire is retained. That's logical, better than average retention. A quality hire performs, so they would have a meets or exceeds expectation rating. I think that's also reasonable. And then sometimes organizations include the idea that quality hires promote or they have potential. So do they have they moved on to a promotion in a 2 to 3 year type period? So all of those are great concepts. The problem from a talent acquisition perspective is that there are many things outside of talent acquisition that define whether or not somebody is going to be retained, performing, or promoting. And it has as much to do with the return to work policy or the compensation policy or how managers work or onboarding as it does to the recruiting team. So it makes the metric very noisy as a metric to measure. And as a result of that, less than 50% of companies even try to measure the quality of hire. And the other 50% have a lot of struggles sort of finding clarity of the signal. So in thinking about this challenge, we've been thinking about how do we take more accountability and control back for the talent acquisition team by defining a metric that's really in your zone of control. Or a leader or a C-level leader can say, I can hold you accountable for X, Y, and Z. You may not be able to control all those outcomes, but at least you can say this. And so we call that the quality of hiring decision. So a little nuanced language, but I think it's very important. The way I think about it, we're in Las Vegas today, is a little bit like poker. The outcome of the hand has a lot to do with chance. That's what I would call the kind of quality hire. It's like whether you're going to win that hand or not, there's some luck involved. But the quality of hiring decision is how did you play your cards? And there are good and bad ways to play your cards in poker. There's certainly chance involved, but there's also a lot of skill and strategy with that. So that metric of quality of hire decision, what we say is, instead of measuring those three things, instead measure, did you run a quality process? Can you say that this was a structured, well thought through process? Does it have a quality? Do you have a quality content? Are you confident that the questions and assessments and tools that you were using to elicit information were good? Do you have quality data? Did people actually capture notes and scores and the types of information that you need to have to create this quality experience? Then you can look at the predictive connection between the quality of hiring decision and the quality of hire. So a little nuance, but I think it's a really important distinction in this industry.
Yeah, it seems almost reckless, if not dangerous, to focus on quality of hire and say, well, it's so hard to measure. Let's just not even measure it, but then not make any effort to look at, well, did we actually run our process the right way in a quality way? Did we give ourselves the best chance of coming up with that great decision? And also along the way, like, what's the likelihood the candidate's having a good experience too? Are we able to get the top talent that we want when we push them through a process that's maybe got some gaps and holes in it?
Yeah, yeah. I'm talent acquisition often stops way short of where they should. So they stop on day one. Okay, that somebody's been hired, I'm going to. But actually, some of the most meaningful signal for for the relevance is actually happening in the first 90 to 180 days, where you're actually seeing whether or not that process that you were responsible for as a talent leader, which was finding and selecting the best people, did it actually work? You have all of that information that needs to be captured. One of the challenges is sometimes that information lives in an HRIS or a different system than the applicant tracking system. When you start to bring those things together, you can really begin to connect the signals in a meaningful way so that you can actually start to tune some of those processes to those outcomes.
And if we're just getting started, and let's say I've made the shift now, I'm thinking about quality of hiring decision. Do I sort of establish a baseline and understand, like, how am I doing today? Do I try to improve that? Or do you often see that maybe sometimes we see in one part of the building, they're doing the job pretty well, but over in this other part, it's not quite as rigorous? Or
Yeah.
like, what have you seen as you've helped your clients kind of come in and look at
Yeah.
quality of hiring decision?
Yeah. That's exactly. So many of the clients that we work with, they have a very clear business need or business pain, which is often a retention or performance issue that is showing up in the first 90 to 180 days. Um, if you have a retention issue in year two, that could be as much to do with compensation and management. But if you're having these in these early phases, you can genuinely move the needle when it comes to an improved interview process. So, thinking about the connection, between those two things. And then, yes, we often start with, we say the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And, let's start with one particular group and uh, demonstrate the benefits of this. And then other groups are knocking on the door saying, hey, how can we? And so it creates a more organic expansion rather than trying to do big, top down push. Let's learn by doing. Let's get started. This is new technology. It's a fast moving space. So let's jump in one area. And yet, yeah.
I also love it. It's a great point when somebody's like, "Oh, they're leaving." Oh no, how long have they been here? 4 years. You're like, "Oh, well, okay, 4 years. That's a pretty good run." Versus how devastating it is when someone leaves after 90 days, 120 days. You're like, "Oh my gosh, we're right back to this. We had just plugged this hole in our team, and now the team's gonna have to pick up the work, and I was about to get my life back, and now I'm back to interviewing again." It's horrible. So it's encouraging to think that we can start looking at the quality of hiring decision and really the rigorous process, and make sure that we're doing those things in a way that's going to improve outcomes for everybody, really.
And we're seeing that, that AI is really helping make this crack this problem in 2025 in a way that's quite meaningful. So some of the research on this, by the way, I'm a big fan of standing on the shoulders of, 60 years of behavioral science, making sure that we're applying science, for good. So we've looked at a lot of meta-analytic studies on interviewing, for example, of what actually works, and then let's use technology to bring best-in-class methods and make them easy to adopt. That's very much how we think about it. And there's been some great research about this whole idea of predictive interviewing and what it would take to do that. And the author is Shaker from 2016, if anybody's interested in really going deep nerd out on that. But essentially it establishes a framework. You can think about it like a 2x2, with one axis being data structure and the other axis being data relevance. And so when you have very high data structure and very high data relevance, you can start to stitch the pieces together to actually do predictive interviewing. And I'll explain in a minute how AI is really very quickly moving us there. But, if you think about a two by two, we're really starting in the bottom left corner with very low data structure and very low data relevance. And the reason for that is that the primary tool that's been given to TA teams is the applicant tracking system. Those technologies were born in circa 2000, 2005, so they've been around for a while, but they're not very good at structuring data. I mean, you might have notes in your ATS, but there's no structure to those notes. You can't actually sort of do anything with that. And oftentimes, the most important relevant factor, as we were talking about a moment ago, is do we have signals on what actually happened? And that doesn't live in the ATS. It lives often in an HRIS or different kinds of systems. So we're starting in this bottom left corner with low data relevance and low data structure. And so what's really been exciting to watch over the last few years is how AI can really capture 1,000 times more information and organize it properly throughout that process. And then now, when we can also get performance outcomes, sort of bring that together. So I think, even though this has been a really tough problem at the quality of, the correlation in predictive hiring for a long time, I think we're about to make a very, very big leap in the technology to really deliver on this.
It's amazing when you look at some of the most rigorous hiring processes, and this works in extremely large companies. They're going to hire 1,000 of a certain type of role, and they'll have all the rubrics and this type of response, and that's this type of score, and everything like this. And you think, well, how in the world are you going to translate that down to this best in class hiring process? It's encouraging to think that AI can help us with a lot of that rigor to give us that structure. Because when the interviewing manager walks in and says, tell me your greatest weakness, you're like, okay, where's the relevance to this? And what are you going to do with the answer anyway? You're going to even code it and score it. You just come into it's very subjective otherwise. And I think people, if you tell them here's an objective way to do it, it becomes, if it's too onerous, they won't do that either. And then again, everybody loses.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. We sort of think about it right away as defining decision criteria and then which is sometimes referred to as skills, but I think people get a little tripped up with skills or competencies or this. The important thing is this is decision criteria for which to make a great hiring decision, and defining those out of the gate. Then not just asking any interview question, you should be specifically asking questions that elicit information about that decision criteria. And then not just capturing notes, but capturing specific notes we record and transcribe, for example, and then organize those notes around the same skill-based decision criteria. So you're starting to align everything back to the end goal, which is making a great decision and structuring all of the data that way. And then when it comes to performance measures, what's historically been available in most organizations is the annual performance review score, which is a score of, in most places, 1 to 5, exceeds expectations, meets expectations, etc. 80% of people get a 3. So, we've been in this world where we had very low data structure. You didn't have very much information. Then you get a score. 80% of people get a 3 an entire year later. And trying to make sense of those two things, there's just too much noise for that to be useful. Now, what we do is those decision criteria are very well defined. All of the data is very well defined. And instead of just asking, is an employee exceeding expectations or not, we ask the hiring manager who has direct experience with, the candidate that was chosen to use the same decision scorecard again at time 2 at the 90 or 180-day period. And so get scores on that skill-based scorecard again. And that then creates, 10 or 12 powerful data hooks into the that you can actually start to do something meaningful. And when you're talking about a 90 or 100-day period, time is tighter, and you have this really rich information about what happened. And then AI is just phenomenal at spotting patterns that are hard for humans. So we can say, actually there's no correlation between this question that you're asking and what happens. Or you've been asking this interview question that you love. Guess what? Everybody gets a 3 on that. That's not a very good use of time because it's not pulling apart the candidates to actually be able to help you distinguish between that. So the new signals that we have are just incredibly incredible. I'm just so excited about where this is, going to actually deliver on the promise of predictive hiring.
And I think it's an example too where we can use these technologies to support the human decision-making process, because the average manager is not going to be able to say, let me just take a blank sheet of paper out and just write excellent interview questions. It's not something we ever train them for, and much less that they even would have time for. So I think being able to be supported in that way and saying, hey, look, this question we've been using, it could probably be a little better. Let's try this one and
Yeah.
watch the candidates sort of separate themselves a little bit more.
Yeah.
It's nice to think that that's something that we can help them with.
Big time. I mean, we talk about this a lot. I think people think a lot when they're thinking about questions, which is essentially a form of assessment tool.
Probably the most popular
The
form of
most
assessment.
popular,
The most
ubiquitous
widely
one
used.
that's most widely used in the world. But actually, a great question is much more about what are you looking for in a good answer. It's one thing for me to sort of ask you a question, lob it out there, but we've all done this. I mean, I've asked people, and then I'm listening to the response, and I'm using a lot of mental load to understand is is that a good response to that particular question? Like, how does that? So actually writing really good interview content, involves not just the question, but also what does a good response look like? Often really good interview questions also include follow-ups to push deeper if the candidate is still answering in a surface-like way with that. And then there's a lot of nuance to the questions. You know, the if you telegraph too much in the question what you're looking for, if you're looking for a skill of, high collaboration, and you say, tell me about a time you did high collaboration, that's one thing. But a really good interview question is sort of aimed at that, but has a backdoor way of doing that. And that the cognitive load of writing a very specific question for a very specific skill that is, written with IO-Psych best practices, that has an answer guide, that has thoughtful follow-up questions, that has a backdoor is just impossible, to do. And so it's really exciting now that AI agents can go through based on a job description, what you're looking for, and write excellent content. And then you can work with the agent. So on Hire Guide, for example, you can say, can you just make that question a little shorter, or make it a little bit more about management, or make it a little harder, or, and so I'm really excited actually about the upping our game collectively as a society, in these interview questions through partnership with AI.
I love that it has follow-up questions, because I think the thing we forget sometimes is that while we may be talking to candidates all the time, they're not interviewing all the time. Something's happened, they had a job loss, they're just got fed up with their last company. So they may interview every few years. So you ask them a question, which is already an artificial format for them, and they give you a superficial answer because they're nervous.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, that was a pretty lousy answer. If you just move on, you didn't
Right.
actually follow up to say, like, okay, let's get past some of the initial sort of, awkwardness of the interview,
Yeah.
and say, oh, well, actually, now that I think about it, yeah, this project I was on, you're like, holy cow, that was an amazing answer. So
Yeah.
it kind of leads me to this next question. You have observed that maybe as many as 25% of managers regret their hiring decision. How much of that do you think is on the interview process, meaning the question, the structure, the setup, as opposed to, I went with my gut, and my gut was wrong in this case? Like, how do you interpret that?
Yeah. So I interpret that first of all as, you know, quick back of envelope math. There's probably about 1 billion interviews happening in Western markets. If you figure like 5 interview, rounds, you talk about probably like 200 million hires in that particular space. 25% of that means, 50 million uh, mistaken connections. And if interviews, and they are the primary tool, the most ubiquitous tool for making these decisions, and it's getting it blatantly wrong 25% of the time. And then they say that by 18 months, about 50% of hires are starting to falter, and only 1 in 5 are definitively a great. What it's showing us is that this tool that we have is just not great. It has a lot of room for improvement and innovation in how how effective that tool can be. And so just as we solve any other problem using technology, using process, using training, we need to bring to bear, a better way of doing these interviews. And it's the most strategic decision that a manager is going to make in a given year, and it is one of the least supported in a proper way in an organization. So there's huge upside and consequence to getting this right. There's candidates hate interviews, hiring, it's slow, it's not a good process, and it's horribly predictive, and bias comes in. It's just rife for innovation. So we're so excited about what's going to actually become possible in the next few years.
Yeah, and you talk about these experience agents that can go in and help us frame up a more structured decision. But AI it's new, it's evolving. How much complexity or how much nuance can we really throw at this thing? For example, to say, well, my job, every time I talk to somebody, they're like, well, this job's we're unique here.
Yeah,
Of course, you're unique
yeah.
here. Yes, I hear that all the time. Funny, but that's the question I have is like, how nuanced do we get when telling them about job context, for example, to try to get it back?
I love that. I love that question. So that's very true. Most people are, believe themselves to be special snowflakes, and I really believe that they are. And because it is such a strategic decision, they they really need they really need to get it right. And so that puts a lot of pressure on them. And so then outsourcing something to a template or something that treats them not like a very can be very threatening. What I think is incredible about what AI can do with hyper personalization is start with the premise that you are a very special snowflake. So, for example, on HireGuide, when we're writing interview content, we're not just writing a generic question. The AI is actually learning everything about your organization. So it's reading your website, it's reading your employment value propositions, it's reading and taking in all that information. We're also taking in the job description. So it's the specifics of your company about the things that you say are important. And then we're looking at the skills that you selected and that said were the most important, and the styles of questions that you really want. And it takes that much specificity to write something that's actually feels like it's, oh, I am a special snowflake, and this is a special snowflake question, for me. And that just wasn't possible even when we started Hire Guide, 3 years ago. It was there was more sort of trust us, come on with a template, and now the hyper personalization is really effective, and so it's earning a lot more trust.
And I think leaning on the strength of these technologies to allow us to do things we can have never been able to do before, it also comes with this need to balance the fact that we don't want to over techno. I don't want to say it the right way, but use technology, lean on it too much, and turn it into a mechanical process. So how do we take advantage of these AI tools, for example, but still allow ourselves to let the humanity and the being human really stay preserved in the interview process?
Yeah, I think this is really important. Um, so first of all, I think when people think about AI and hiring, or AI and the quality of hire, the knee-jerk reaction is to try and play the obvious connection, which is, let's let the AI interview people. And actually, that doesn't work. It's not ethical. It's not legal. And the best organizations in the world have no interest in letting a black box LLM, hire the next generation of, talent for their companies. Too important. So the way to think about the AI in the recipe of hiring isn't like, let's jump to this end conclusion where AI is interviewing people, but actually think about, we know from behavioral science a number of practices, which is generally referred to as sort of skills-based structured interviewing, a number of practices that make your job as an interviewer delightful and much easier and are very high signal. And so the AI is with you much more in a sort of copilot-like way, where it's helping gather information, but you as the human decision maker are always in the driver's seat. And for example, during the interviews, you talked about human connection, which I think is really important. And so during the interviews, you can make much more of a human connection with somebody when you can really listen to them, when you're not trying to, for example, take notes, scribble down all of the things, because you know that that's going to organize the information for you. Can really listen. You can listen to them afterwards too. You don't have to just rely on, can't really remember what we talked about, but I remember this residual gut feeling that I now have. It's not like that anymore. You actually have a full record of that. And you can ask the AI to help you recall certain details. Like we talked about that story. What was that story about? Bring it back. So I think that the technology is actually enabling, if used in the right way. And let me underline that. There are lots of people who are using this, I think, in a less um, nuanced way. If used in the right way, it can really empower human decision makers. My son's recently taken an interest in chess, and so we're nerding out on chess. And the best chess players in the world, um, you know, are starting to lose to AI. But the best chess players in the world with AI, best player human plus AI, is very much beating AI on its own. So I think the equation, is going to be like that in many different places, not AI or human. It's human and AI together gets you the best outcomes. And in hiring, it matters. And so you're going to want human plus AI, but absolutely not a fan of AI only.
Well, I'm tremendously encouraged by the conversation because it is such an important decision for everyone involved, whether it's the manager who's making the decision, whether it's the team that's going to be working with this new individual. Certainly for the individual themselves, we just want to make sure there's a strong fit, because when there's not and we make the decision anyway, only bad things happen. So, and the scope, the size of the numbers you shared it's mind-boggling. But I'll tell you, Scott, we've been talking a lot about interview questions. I have a very different type of question
Yeah.
for us right now. It's a
Okay.
trivia question.
Yes.
I
Yes.
always love to play this trivia segment with my guests. And in this case, we have a question that you and I are a team, because I don't know the question. I don't know the answers.
Oh,
It's going to be very
amazing.
exciting for
I
us
love it.
both. And we're going to see how we do with this. Look, I've even got an official envelope here if you're watching at home. And here's our question. Scott says that your LinkedIn profile tells us that you won first place in the 2015 London Business School Entrepreneurship Case Competition.
Okay.
Congratulations. He says,
Yes. Thank you.
fair. I see what he's
Uh-huh.
doing. It says, we'll get into a question about England football stadiums.
Oh, wow.
Look out.
Uh-oh.
It's
Okay.
hard to get a decent Cuban sandwich at London Stadium, the home pitch of what Heineken-sponsored English Premier team, sometimes known as the Irons. The Irons. Is it A, Manchester United, B, Chelsea, C, Arsenal, or D, West Ham United? So we got 1 in 4 chance. Let's talk about decision making here.
Ooh.
We don't have AI at our disposal, so we're on our own.
Yeah. Okay.
Man U versus Chelsea, Arsenal, or West Ham.
I have to tell you that I did live in the UK. My wife is British, and I have a whole extended family that I am about to alienate if I do not get this answer. So we got some real stakes on this one. I'm going to go Arsenal C.
Arsenal C it is. Okay, audience, if you're listening in at home and locking in your answer, it turns out that the correct answer is D.
Okay.
D, which is West
There you
Ham
go.
United.
Right.
The Irons. I have no idea why that would be, but we learn something new every day.
We learn something new every day. It's great. And to all of my British family and friends, I am so sorry that I did not get that right. We could please take me to more football games so that I can.
That's what it is. Maybe now this is a chance to go to West Ham and see the Irons for yourself.
Exactly.
We'll turn that into a positive. But before I ask where we can go to learn more about you, I just also want to say tremendous respect for running a B Corp, the transparency, the impact that comes along with companies that put stakeholder capitalism at the center. I have a tremendous amount of respect for that, Scott. So thank you for that. But my best question of all, where can my listeners go, Scott, to learn more about you and about HireGuide?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So you can go to hireguide.com. Up at the top, there's one of the options is resources. And there's so much good content in there as you're thinking through, these problems and thinking about how to make interviews, which are the gateway to opportunity at work, how to make those faster, fairer, twice as predictive. So there's a lot in there.
Awesome. Well, listeners, you're one click away. I'm going to have that link for you in the show notes. You can connect with Scott, learn all about HireGuide. Scott, thanks so much for being with us today. Really loved having you on.
Thank you. Thank you.